Ever wondered how an empire could rise from a tiny borderland state to rule 3 continents for over 600 years? That's the incredible story of the Ottoman Empire. Let's dive into how it all began, how it reached its magnificent peak, and what ultimately led to its dramatic fall. Our story starts in the late 1200s in northwestern Anatolia, what is now modern-day Turkey. At the time, the once mighty Seljuk Sultanate was crumbling, and the powerful Byzantine Empire was losing its grip. Into this power vacuum stepped a small Turkish principality. Thanks to its strategic location, right on the frontier between the Islamic and Christian worlds, it had the perfect launchpad for expansion. The early Ottomans were driven by a fierce frontier warrior spirit, but they were also incredibly pragmatic. Instead of just conquering and destroying, their leaders were smart. They absorbed local populations and administrative systems, building a stable foundation as they grew. This approach allowed them to expand rapidly, swallowing up smaller states and pushing deeper into Byzantine territory. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1453, the young and ambitious Sultan Mehmed II set his sights on the legendary city of Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire. After a grueling siege, using massive cannons that were cutting-edge technology for the time, Mehmed's forces breached the city's impenetrable walls. The fall of Constantinople was a seismic event. It didn't just end the Byzantine Empire. It transformed the Ottomans from a regional power into a true Eurasian empire. Now in control of this vital hub, they held the key to the lucrative trade routes connecting Europe and Asia. The capture of Constantinople was just the beginning of the Ottomans' golden age. The 16th century saw the empire reach its absolute zenith. Under powerful sultans like Selim I, known as Selim the Grim for his ferocity, the empire expanded dramatically into the Middle East and North Africa, claiming the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. But the name most associated with Ottoman splendor is Suleiman the Magnificent. His reign, from 1520 to 1566, is considered the peak of Ottoman power, wealth, and culture. Under Suleiman, the empire stretched from Hungary in the north to Yemen in the south, from Algeria in the west to the borders of Persia in the east. It was a global superpower, with a navy that dominated the Mediterranean and an army that made European monarchs tremble. So, what was the secret to this incredible success? It was a combination of brilliant strategies and unique advantages. First, their military was second to none. The Ottomans were early adopters of gunpowder, and their use of cannons and muskets gave them a decisive edge on the battlefield. Central to their military might was the Janissary Corps. These elite infantry troops were a permanent professional standing army, fiercely loyal to the Sultan and disciplined in a way few European armies could match. They were the special forces of their day. Second, the empire was run by a strong centralized government headed by the Sultan, whose authority was absolute. This prevented the kind of internal squabbling that weakened many of their rivals. But this strong rule was also flexible. The Ottomans developed a unique system called the millet system, which allowed different religious communities like Orthodox, Christians, and Jews to govern their own internal affairs according to their own laws and customs. This kept the diverse, multi-ethnic empire relatively stable and peaceful for centuries. And finally, geography was on their side. Controlling Constantinople and the eastern Mediterranean meant they controlled the flow of goods and wealth between continents. The taxes and tariffs from this trade filled the imperial treasury, funding their massive armies and lavish building projects. From stunning mosques to intricate palaces, the wealth of the empire was on full display. But as the old saying goes, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. The very strengths that propelled the Ottoman Empire to greatness eventually became its greatest weaknesses. The decline wasn't a sudden collapse, but a long, slow decay that began in the 17th century. The military, once the engine of expansion, started to sputter. The Janissaries, who had been the pillar of the army, became a conservative force resistant to any change. As European powers went through a military revolution developing new tactics, technologies, and organizational structures, the Ottomans were left behind. The Janissaries often revolted at the mere suggestion of reform, more interested in protecting their privileges than in modernizing the army. Economically, the world was changing, and the Ottomans couldn't keep up. The discovery of new maritime trade routes around Africa and across the Atlantic meant that Europe no longer had to go through the Ottoman Empire to trade with the East. Suddenly, their control over the old trade routes was worth a lot less. To make matters worse, a massive influx of silver from the Americas flooded into Europe and then into the empire, causing rampant inflation that destabilized the economy. And while Europe was entering the Industrial Revolution, building factories and modernizing its economy, the Ottomans failed to industrialize, falling further and further behind. Politically, the strong leadership that had defined the early empire faded. Later sultans were often less competent, raised in the confines of the palace and detached from the realities of governing. Court intrigue and corruption became widespread. Important government positions were often sold to the highest bidder rather than given to the most capable person. This weakened the state from the inside out. Perhaps the most potent force working against the empire was the rise of nationalism. The idea that people with a common language, culture, and history should have their own independent nation-state, born out of the French Revolution, was poison to a multi-ethnic empire like the Ottomans. Throughout the 19th century, nationalist movements erupted across the Balkans, with Greeks, Serbs, Bulgarians, and others fighting for their independence, often with the support of European powers like Russia and Britain. The empire's strategic position also became a liability. Its vast territories made it a target for the competing ambitions of rising European powers. A series of military defeats and diplomatic blunders further accelerated the decline. The failed siege of Vienna in 1683 is often seen as a symbolic turning point, marking the end of Ottoman expansion into Europe. From then on, the empire was mostly on the defensive, slowly losing territory in one war after another. By the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire was known throughout Europe as the sick man of Europe. It was a sprawling, ailing giant, kept alive mainly because the European powers couldn't agree on how to carve it up without upsetting the balance of power. There were attempts at reform. The Tanzimat reforms of the mid-19th century tried to modernize the state, the military, and society, but it was too little, too late. These reforms often faced fierce internal resistance and couldn't reverse the centuries of decline. The final blow came with World War I. The Ottoman leadership made the fateful decision to side with Germany and the Central Powers. After 4 years of brutal conflict, they were on the losing side. The victorious Allied powers dismantled the empire, carving up its Middle Eastern territories into new states under British and French control. In the Turkish heartland of Anatolia, a nationalist movement led by a brilliant military commander named Mustafa Kemal Ataturk rose from the ashes. He fought off invading forces and established a new, independent nation. In 1922, the Sultanate was officially abolished, bringing 623 years of Ottoman rule to an end. The following year, the Republic of Turkey was founded, marking the start of a new chapter. And so the story of the Ottoman Empire came to a close. It's a tale of incredible ambition, stunning success, and a long, painful decline. It reminds us that even the mightiest empires are not forever, and that the forces of history, technology, and ideas can build up and tear down even the greatest of powers. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey through history interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from our incredible past. See you in the next video.